Venezuela has reaffirmed the importance of promoting multilateralism in negotiations on disarmament. Brazil has confirmed its first case of COVID-19, representing the first in Latin America. The Syrian army continues to advance in its offensive against terrorists in Idlib province, while Russia and Turkey begins talks on the situation. Hi from the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba. This is From the South. I'm Cristina Escobar, and we begin in Geneva, where Deputy Minister for Multilateral Affairs at the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry, Alexander Yáñez, participated in the high-level segment of the UN Conference on Disarmament, stressed the importance of achieving nuclear disarmament. Wednesday also saw a parallel event on coercion and unilateral measures, during which the Venezuelan government denounced the consequences of Donald Trump's policies against the Latin American nation.
Venezuela reaffirms the importance of promoting multilateralism as a fundamental principle for the negotiations over the issues of disarmament and non-proliferation. In that sense, we affirm the importance of the fourth extraordinary period of the session of the General Assembly of the United Nations dedicated to disarmament. This continues being the appropriate way to promote established priorities, including nuclear disarmament, as a maximum priority for the international community.
And on the sidelines of the ongoing 43rd session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza met with the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer, to discuss cooperation agreements. And Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza also met this Wednesday with the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. The meeting formed part of the agenda of the Venezuelan minister in the context of the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council. Arreaza ratified the willingness of the government of Venezuela to cooperate with all United Nations mechanisms in the framework of respect for international law. And Arreaza also held a meeting with the Director General of the International Organization for Migration, Laura Thompson, to denounce the unilateral U.S. sanctions imposed against Venezuela's state-run airline Conviasa. He warned Thompson that these measures intend to prevent the implementation of the return to the homeland plan promoted by the government of President Nicolás Maduro, which facilitates the return of Venezuelan migrants stranded in vulnerable conditions in other nations. President of Chile, Sebastián Piñera, announced a tax reform on Tuesday to collect $2.2 billion additional dollars per year. The Chilean head of state said that the measure would generate additional revenue equivalent to 0.6% of gross domestic product. He claimed this would be used to finance a social agenda with emphasis on the protection of older adults. According to the Ministry of Finance, the measure will establish fairer treatment for this sector in terms of tax payments. Chile has been rocked by widespread protests for months against the social model promoted by the government. Environmental movements in Costa Rica held a vigil on Tuesday night in honor of assassinated indigenous leader Jerry Rivera and demanded justice. Gathering outside the headquarters of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, indigenous organizations also demanded respect and protection for their communities and their land. According to the Costa Rican Conservation Federation, Rivera's murder is an example of the hypocrisy of the state, which on the one hand claims to defend human rights, while on the other has abandoned the indigenous population. The Central Electoral Board of the Dominican Republic announced the printing of ballots for the 140 municipalities and their districts in which manual voting was suspended during the municipal elections of February 16th. According to the board, around 2,800,000 ballots are being printed. At a press conference, the board reported that the printing of ballots for the 18 municipalities using the automated voting system during the previous process will begin this Wednesday. The ballots were validated on Monday by accredited delegates of political parties. The rescheduled extraordinary municipal elections will be held on March 15. And turning to Guyana now, after much criticism and following a meeting with opposition leader Bharat Jagdeo and a team from the People's Progressive Party, the Guyana Elections Commission has backtracked on its decision to reduce the number of polling stations in the upcoming general elections. Chairman Commission Justice Claudette Singh has made it clear that the decision not to use private residences as polling stations remains in place, but the Chief Elections Officer, Keith Lowenfield, is set to address complaints regarding the public facilities to be used. A Commonwealth observer group led by the former Prime Minister of Barbados, Owen Arthur, is already in Guyana to observe the preparation for the upcoming general and regional elections. Democrats unleashed a roaring assault against Bernie Sanders' electability and seized on Michael Bloomberg's non-disclosure agreements with women he worked with in the past during the 10th televised primary debate. Sanders acknowledged he was in the firing line with rivals seeking to derail his push for the nomination following 2 straight victories in New Hampshire and then Nevada. Even Senator Elizabeth Warren, a fellow progressive, attacked Sanders for not explaining how his costly programs like universal health care and tuition-free college would be paid for. Tuesday's debate came just 4 days before South Carolina's primary and 1 week before more than a dozen states vote on a Super Tuesday.
The last 4 years has been. I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. I wonder why. And maybe, Pete mentions what the American people want. I will tell you, Pete, what the American people want, and Joe, what the American people want. They don't want candidates to be running to billionaires for huge amounts of funding.
All right, let's clear this up.
And we stay on topic because Israeli media echoed on Wednesday the statements of Bernie Sanders, who is currently leading the Democratic presidential race. Sanders suggested he would consider reversing President Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The embassy move was met with international criticism for recognizing the contested city as Israel's undivided capital, when Palestinians have long demanded East Jerusalem as the capital of a future independent state. Sanders also called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a reactionary racist during the latest Democratic debate. Coming up, Brazil has confirmed its first case of COVID-19, representing the first case in Latin America. Stay with us for more. Hi, welcome back. The first case of the new coronavirus in Latin America was confirmed by the Brazilian authorities on Wednesday. The patient is a 61-year-old Brazilian man who recently traveled to Italy and is in a stable condition but remains in isolation at his home in Sao Paulo. The diagnosis was announced by Health Minister Luis Enrique Mandetta, who added that the South American nation is investigating 20 additional suspected cases, including 12 patients who recently returned from Italy. Our reporter, Andre Vieira, brings us more details.
During a press conference, Brazil's Ministry of Health confirmed the country has the first case of coronavirus. A 61-year-old citizen in Sao Paulo who traveled to Italy between February 9th and 21st and acquired the disease. The first test on the patient was made in Sao Paulo on Tuesday, and on Wednesday a second test came out confirming the case, which now becomes the first in Latin America. The minister called for people to remain calm and said all measures were being taken to prevent an outbreak. Meanwhile, health experts are calling attention to the fact that Brazil has suffered successive and severe cuts in health budgets, causing concern for people who now have to deal with regular diseases and COVID-19 too. In recent years, Brazil has had a freeze on the budget for public services since the government of Michael Temer, which governed following the coup. Now, under the government of Bolsonaro, the health sector has lost, in a period of 1 year, 4.3% of its budget.
And China reported 52 new COVID-19 deaths on Wednesday, the lowest figure in more than 3 weeks, bringing the death toll to 2,715. Authorities have noted the impact of the epidemic on the sports industry, but assured that the preparations for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics are advancing according to schedule.
According to the schedule, there are 20 Beijing test events, including the first event in February. All the other events will be held in the 2020-2021 competition season. The cancellation of that event was due to the epidemic and to protect the health of athletes and referees. The following test events we have should not be affected, and preparations for them are underway according to schedule.
The French Health Ministry announced that a 60-year-old man has become the first French victim of the COVID-19 virus. The man died on Tuesday night after being rushed to a Paris hospital in a serious condition.
Regarding the 3 new cases we had last night, there is a 55-year-old French man who is currently hospitalized in Amiens and who is in serious clinical situation. He is currently in intensive care. The investigation surrounding the case is ongoing. The 16th case is a 36-year-old Frenchman currently hospitalized in Strasbourg. He was just returned from Lombardy. He shows no signs of seriousness, and the regional health authority there also has contact details for all the people who he's been in contact with. The 17th confirmed case is a 60-year-old Frenchman who was urgently tested yesterday at the Salpêtrière hospital in a very serious condition and who unfortunately died during the night. An investigation into the circumstances have been launched as a matter of urgency.
And the novel coronavirus has now infected more than 80,000 people around the world. Algerian authorities announced the country's first case of the virus as an Italian citizen who arrived in the country on February 17th. Meanwhile, in Italy, the total number infected with COVID-19 stands at 374, while there have been 12 deaths and 1 person has been cured. The total number of confirmed cases in Iran is now 95 and 16 people have died. Meanwhile, Switzerland, Croatia and Austria reported their first cases of the coronavirus on Tuesday. Over 600,000 South Koreans have signed an online petition calling for the impeachment of President Moon Jae-in over the government's mishandling of the COVID-19 outbreak. The petition appeared on the website of the presidential office on February 4th. Any petition that gets more than 200,000 signatures in less than a month must receive an official response. The petitioner argued that the government refused to forbid Chinese citizens from entering Korea and also criticized President Moon's decision to provide 3 million masks to China, while he failed to come up with any measures to deal with the spike in mask prices and the shortage of these supplies in the country itself. The first meeting of the negotiation table on Catalan independence, which brings together delegations of the Spanish and Catalan governments, began on Wednesday at the Moncloa Palace. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez and Catalan Regional Chief Quim Torra opened formal talks in the hope of resolving the political crisis sparked by the region's separatist movement and 2017 independence referendum. Sánchez noted on Wednesday that the independence camp doesn't represent the majority of Catalan society and therefore the dialogue wouldn't be an easy task. Meanwhile, Torra has insisted he will repeat his demands for Catalonia to be allowed to hold a referendum on independence and for the release of 9 separatist leaders who are serving prison sentences for their role in the 2017 secession attempt. And we conclude in the UK, where a London court has heard that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange phoned the White House to warn that lives would be put in danger by the publication of classified documents. Assange is fighting extradition to the US to face trial on 18 charges over the leaking of hundreds of thousands of cables in 2010 and 2011. The court heard that WikiLeaks had asked to speak to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton as a matter of urgency over fears regarding the information that was about to be released online. The court was also told that Assange has been strip-searched twice, placed in 5 different holding cells and handcuffed 11 times. On day 3 of the extradition trial, Assange supporters continue to gather outside Woolwich Crown Court. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has come under fire for not yet visiting flooded areas of the UK weeks after the waters first rose. Meanwhile, opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has visited flood victims in several areas.
How can the country trust a Prime Minister, a part-time Prime Minister? Last night, schmoozing Tory party donors at a very expensive black-tie ball, instead of getting out there and supporting the people who are suffering because of the floods.
And after this last break, the Syrian army continues to advance in its offensive against terrorists in Idlib province. Stay with us for more. Thank you for joining us again. A Russian delegation will visit Turkey on Wednesday to discuss the situation in Idlib, an embattled province of northwestern Syria. Russia's foreign ministry said it expected positive results from the talks with Turkey on Wednesday, according to Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov. Turkish and Russian officials held 2 rounds of talks in Ankara and Moscow in the past few weeks, but negotiations have not yet yielded any results. Tensions have been running high amid the offensive by Syrian government forces in Idlib province and parts of Aleppo, the last remaining rebel-held areas in the country. On Wednesday, Syrian forces liberated 7 new territories. And our correspondent there, Hisham Wanous, brings us more details on the situation in Syria.
Greetings, friends. The Arab army continues to advance against terrorist groups in the south countryside of the northwestern province of Idlib, the last extremist stronghold in Syria. In the past 2 days, Syrian troops have liberated more than 15 towns and villages, including the strategic city of Khabar Nabil. Immediately afterwards, the Syrian troops began operations to comb and clear mines from the liberated areas and establish control points to continue their advance against the terrorist groups, noting that the extremists suffered heavy casualties in the clashes and Syrian troops seized their military equipment and munitions. Likewise, they assured that the terrorists are almost cornered in small areas of Idlib, and the Arab army will soon be able to announce that Idlib is a territory free of terrorists, despite Turkey's threats to attract Syrian Arab army troops if they don't Syrian Arab troops if they don't stop this anti-terrorist offensive. But we will continue to follow developments. Greetings, friends. The Arab army continues to advance against terrorist groups in the south countryside of the northwestern province of Idlib, the last extremist stronghold in Syria. In the past 2 days, Syrian troops have liberated more than 15 towns and villages, including the strategic city of Khabar Nabil. Immediately afterwards, the Syrian troops began operations to comb and clear mines from the liberated areas and establish control points to continue their advance against the terrorist groups, noting that the extremists suffered heavy casualties in the clashes and Syrian troops.
And we continue in Palestine because 56 Palestinians, including 2 journalists, have been injured after Israeli forces used live ammunition and rubber bullets to disperse a protest against U.S. President Donald Trump's so-called Middle East peace plan. The protesters had taken to the streets for a peaceful demonstration in Diasarment village in the occupied West Bank when Israeli soldiers arrived and violently repressed them. The Red Crescent confirmed it had treated and evacuated dozens of people to a nearby hospital.
We are continuing with the national campaign to support the Jordan Valley and fight the deal of the century. The decision was to go to Bardala and Kaun to cultivate olives, but the occupation prevented us from going to that region. This is our land, and we will exercise our natural right on this land by cultivating our land and building our schools. We are protesting in order to prove to the Zionists that we will not waste a single grain of our soil from our land, especially the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is valued the same as Jerusalem, which is the eternal capital of Palestine.
A summit of Central Africa states heard appeals to step up the fight against jihadists, whose offensive across 3 countries has claimed thousands of lives and inflicted crippling economic damage. Mauritania's president and summit host Mohamed Ghazouani warned that the conflict in Libya poses a threat to the security and development of the entire Sahel region, the zone between the Sahara to the north and the Sudanian savannah to the south. He added that the instability in Libya has created a fertile ground for illicit activities such as the trafficking of arms, humans and drugs. The Sahel region, which comprises Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Mauritania and Chad, is battling an onslaught by armed groups that have killed more than 10,000 people since 2016.
Despite several international initiatives, the Libyan crisis continues to deepen and become more complex. Unfortunately, it continues to fuel and strengthen the activities of terrorist groups in the Sahel through the illicit trafficking of arms, munitions, drugs, and human beings.
A West African political activist who set fire to a banknote in an anti-colonialist protest has been expelled from Senegal, his lawyer said on Tuesday. In August 2017, Kemi Seba set fire to a 5,000 CFA franc note worth about $8 as part of a protest against Franc-Afrique, the term for France's post-colonial meddling in Africa. Seba, whose real name is Estelio Capochichi, was ordered to leave Senegal after his trial, while the government declared him a serious threat to public order and cited his disparaging remarks aimed at African leaders. The move sparked condemnation from human rights groups. South African trade unions and social movements held a march to Parliament ahead of the 2020 budget announcement by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. Unions are unhappy with the austerity measures that Mboweni was expected to unveil on Wednesday, including an increase in value-added tax, a wage freeze for all public service workers, and retrenchment of thousands from state-owned enterprises. Mboweni says these measures are necessary to revive the ailing economy, but unions argue that the measures will hurt the poor. The death toll in the worst religious violence seen in decades in New Delhi has risen to 23 as Indian police have been accused of looking the other way while Muslims and their properties are targeted by Hindu fundamentalists. The clashes first broke out on Sunday between those who are for and against the Citizenship Act passed last year that offers Indian citizenship to religious minorities migrants but exclude Muslims. The protests came in the context of the visit to India by U.S. President Donald Trump. Prime Minister Narendra Modi tweeted on Wednesday appealing for peace 3 days after the violence broke out. He added that he had reviewed the situation and police were working to restore calm. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And please join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Cristina Escobar. Thank you for watching.